Let's compare the military forces of Australia and Singapore. Australia is larger than Singapore. Canberra is the capital of Australia and Singapore is the capital of Singapore. Australia is populous than Singapore. Australian dollar is the currency of Australia and Singapore dollar is the currency of Singapore. GDP expectation of Australia in 2022 is higher than Singapore. What are the military forces of these two countries? Australia is more powerful than Singapore when military power is compared. Defence budget of Australia in 2022 is higher than Singapore. Singapore has more active personnel than Australia. And reserve personnel too. Australia has no paramilitary force. Singapore has more total personnel than Australia. Let's compare the land forces of Australia and Singapore. Singapore has more tanks than Australia. And armored vehicles too. Australia has no self-propelled artilleries. Singapore has more towed artilleries than Australia. Australia has no rocket projectors. Both countries don't process nuclear weapons. Let's compare the air forces of Australia and Singapore. Australia is more powerful than Singapore when total aircraft strength is compared. Singapore has more fighters than Australia. Singapore has no dedicated attacks. Australia has more transports than Singapore. And trainers too. Australia has more special mission aircrafts than Singapore. Singapore has more tanker fleets than Australia. Australia has more helicopters than Singapore. Australia has more attacks helicopters too. Australia has more airports than Singapore. Let's compare the naval forces of Australia and Singapore. Australia is more powerful than Singapore when total naval assets are compared in 2022. Both countries don't have aircraft carriers. Singapore has no helicopter carriers but Australia has two. Singapore has no destroyers but Australia has 3. Australia has more frigates than Singapore. Australia has no corvettes but Singapore has 6. Australia has more submarines than Singapore. Singapore has more patrol vessels than Australia. Both countries have 4 mine warfares. Australia has more ports than Singapore.